Hey friends, welcome back. I am so glad you're here. Today we're going to do an entire week of meals from scratch that I make my family of four. So go ahead and grab a cup of coffee, some laundry to fold. Let's get started with some really delicious meals. So first up on the list is some really delicious sopes with some caramelized onions, roasted poblano peppers, and homemade refried beans. This was such a delicious meal, and I'm absolutely going to be making these again. And what's really great about these is they are absolutely super budget friendly. I make my refried beans from scratch because it saves a ton of money. You can get a huge bag of beans from the store for super cheap, but if you don't have the time, you can obviously buy the refried beans from the store. That will help make this meal go a little bit quicker on a weeknight. And I just throw some taco seasoning, some garlic powder, onion flakes, salt, pepper, and usually some sort of chili. So I think I put some chipotle pepper in here, but I can't remember which one I grabbed off the shelf. But I usually just throw it in there to add a little bit of flavor, a little bit of spice, and I just pressure cook it at 40 minutes and they come out super tender and delicious. So while I'm getting these beans going, I'm just throwing some poblano peppers into the oven. Under my broiler function, it goes for about 15 minutes and you just want to flip them halfway through. This just gets a nice little char and good flavor on them. When I take them out, I just throw them into a glass container and put a dish towel over it so that they can kind of heat up a little bit and finish cooking. I'm chopping up some onions for caramelized onions here. Since I was in the kitchen and cooking, it was super easy to whip up because you just have to stir it a little bit, but there's kind of low effort in them otherwise. I also make sure to save my veggie scraps for bone broth. I'm actually going to make some later on in this video for some of our other meals. And just a note, if you don't have time for caramelized onions, you can also whip up some really quick pickled onions, and you can do that by just heating up equal parts vinegar and water and cutting up an onion, throwing it into a glass jar, and just putting it aside. That'll quick pickle them, or you can make them the night before if you know you're going to have a very rushed night. The next thing I'm going to make up is my masa dough. And so I love working with masa, to be honest, because it is a very cheap ingredient and it's really easy because you just use the masa flour and the water. Now, I'm no expert in corn tortillas. I don't claim to be, and I'm still working on kind of mastering making them. However, I love to learn by doing, and so I just keep practicing. And I honestly think that most things that you make homemade are going to be better than anything you buy in the store. You look for a hummus consistency and you want to make sure that they don't crack when you push on them. So that's what I was looking for. Now, I don't have a tortilla press, and I'm a big believer that you don't need to have tons of special tools in the kitchen, and you can totally make do with what you have. So I just take a glass bowl, I put some saran wrap on it, and I rolled some dough balls out and I just squished them as much as I could. And sorry I was out of frame here, but I do show it a little bit later on again. And so I just squished them as much as I could. You don't want them as flat as corn tortillas because you want them to have a little bit of structure to them when you fry them so that they stay together. And because you're going to kind of eat these by hand. You could totally use them by fork and knife, but I don't know. I feel like by hand is just really kind of the way to do it. And so I just made up probably about like 12 or so of these. And I finish up the rest of the dough with just making corn tortillas because we're going to make chilaquiles later in the week. And I figured since I had everything out, I might as well just make them now. And so once the sopes come off of the pan, you want to kind of just like pinch up the ridge on the edge to make kind of like a boat or just like a nice structure to hold all of your toppings once you put them on. And I took them out a little bit hot here. And so you can wait for them to cool down a little bit, but not too much because you want them still to be malleable. I think there's kind of that sweet spot in there. But with babies kind of on my legs, I kind of just do what I can when I can. So I just kind of did that. So here you can see a little bit better me squishing them down with the glass container. So it was super easy. I just put a little parchment paper under there, by the way, so that didn't stick to the kitchen island. Here are the beans when they were done. They were so good. Honestly, these would be really good just as is if you don't have time to go through the entire refried bean process because they get really tender this way and they would be really great as a topping as is. I took the chili out, but if you want a little bit of spice, you could take the stem off and kind of blend it into it. I don't like to put it too spicy because I hope that my kids will eat them. My toddler's a little bit picky these days, but my 15-month-old will pretty much eat anything I put in front of her, so I'm just kind of waiting for her to become a little bit more picky, but I hope she doesn't. And I put the sauté function on, a little bit of bacon grease. I always keep mine after I make bacon. You could also use lard here or oil. And I drained the beans and then I kept a liquid to the side from the beans and I put them back into the pan and just smashed them down with a potato masher. And you could also use an immersion blender here if you like them very thin. I like a little bit of chunk to my refried beans. I like the little bit of texture, but I am going to try the immersion blender next time just to see how thin I could get them. But in that case, you probably really will want the reserved liquid because they can dry out a little bit quickly, and it's nice to keep it in the fridge too for leftovers because it just helps kind of revive them a little bit. Now, then I put the soap base into a cast iron skillet with a little bit of hot oil in there, just enough to kind of cover the pan, not too much. And then I fry them for about a minute to 30 seconds each side. I just kept kind of an eye on them and they really fried up really nicely. You just want a little bit of fry on them. You don't want to get them too dark. This is what they turned out to be. I had actually add the poblano peppers on later. I totally forgot to put them out, but all of our toppings, this was so, so good. Such a great dinner and really budget friendly. So now I am just prepping up some granola for breakfast this week. I love granola because it's actually so much easier to make than you think, and it just takes a few easy ingredients. I can do it with one hand when I have to carry my baby, which is most of the time. If you know, you know. And so I just melt up some coconut oil. You could also use butter. Just make sure you have it on a low enough heat that it doesn't burn the butter. I love some pecans in there. You could also use walnuts or any other kind of soft nut. I'm just not partial to almonds, but I know a lot of people love almonds in their granola. But I love pecans. They're just the best to me. And so I spilled some of these sunflower seeds when I tried to open it, but I put some in here because I actually bought this for a different recipe and I just thought maybe I could use some up in here. And then I put in some maple syrup, a little bit of salt as well. I like a saltier granola more than a super sweet one, so definitely just add as much or as little as you would like there, but I do think you need a little bit of salt in there to kind of balance a lot of the sweetness. And then I just mix it up, make sure all of the ingredients are super incorporated. You could really put in anything here. I don't love dried fruit in my granola, but that would be a really good thing to add in. I would just add it in after you bake it so it doesn't get kind of funky. Same with the chocolate chips. And then you just want to spread it out thin on a parchment paper. I put mine in at 350. Some recipes call for 325, but either way, you just want to kind of cook it lower and slower. I do it for about 8 minutes, flip it, and then another 8 minutes, and usually take it out unless I think it needs a little bit of time. But definitely keep an eye on it because it can burn pretty easily. Later on that day, I decided to make some banana bread because I had a few bananas in the fridge of leftovers that the kids didn't finish and some ripening ones on top of the fridge that definitely just needed to be used up. So I just threw them in my KitchenAid. I used to make banana bread by hand, but then I just started using my KitchenAid because why not? It makes it so much easier. And I just started to blend up the bananas so that they got really smooth and make a nice texture in the bread. And I cracked some eggs in there, and definitely risky to do it on such a high speed there. I got some shells in, but oh well. And then I put in some sour cream. My favorite banana bread recipes are ones with either like sour cream or yogurt. I find that it gives like the best texture. It's super moist, so highly recommend. I'll link one below. I never really follow a specific recipe anymore. I've made it so many times between like muffins and breads that I just kind of go based on memory and like how it looks, but roughly I kind of follow the same procedure every time. So again, I'll link something that's very similar to the recipe that I follow. And I always love adding some chocolate chips. I think next time I'm also going to add some pecans, because later on when I show you, I made some French toast out of this, and when it started to get a little stale, it was like a 10 out of 10, and I highly recommend it. I think some pecans would have been awesome. So now I'm just picking apart a chicken that I had cooked in the Instant Pot. I really love cooking whole chicken in the Instant Pot because it's so easy and it really gives me a lot of meat. And of course, then I can use the bones to make broth later on. So highly recommend it. And I am also just chopping up some stale bread that I had. I'd made a loaf earlier in the week and it got pretty stale. And then I'm just making it into breadcrumbs because there's nothing better than homemade breadcrumbs in my opinion. And I drizzled some olive oil on it, and I kind of accidentally, well not accidentally, but was kind of forced into getting olive oil at Aldi the other day because they didn't have avocado oil, and I kind of forgot how much I like it because I haven't bought it in such a long time. But I just made a quick salad. I had some leftover greens from the week before that I wanted to make sure I used up, and I tossed all of those croutons in there. It was definitely a hearty salad, and a little bit of Caesar dressing as well. So this made such a good lunch, and a little bit of parm too, can't forget that. I am kind of becoming obsessed with salads again, and if you guys have a favorite salad recipe, definitely drop it in the comments below because I definitely need to work on my salad game. I always get a little intimidated by it. And then for dinner, I just made leftover soap base, but instead of the masa dough, I just made rice and made a little bowl, and it was really, really good. Next up, I am making some homemade crackers. Now, I've only made these a handful of times before, and I definitely have some work on figuring out how to make these the best, but even though they didn't turn out exactly how I'd hoped, I still think that they are really good, and they went really good with the chicken salad I'm about to make. But I just basically shredded up almost like a whole stick of butter and some flour, a little bit of baking powder, water, oil, and I flattened it out as much as I could. And this is where I feel like I need a little bit more work, is like, do I need to split the dough in half and roll it out? Also, maybe a real cutter might help, but this is kind of the size I thought I wanted them. But honestly, I think they needed to be a little bit bigger. For some reason, I thought maybe they would expand a little bit more than they did. But I think bigger is a little bit better here. And I ended up on the second batch just cutting them into squares, which actually worked a little bit better. But you gotta poke the holes in them so that they bake evenly. And that was probably like the easiest part of this. But honestly, overall, this whole process wasn't that bad. But as you can see, they just were a little bit thicker and a little bit smaller than I initially anticipated. I was going kind of for like the Ritz cracker size. But again, they still turned out really good, and I will keep working and share any tips that I learned. So I am just making the sauce for the chicken salad here. It's basically a mayo. And I am just whipping that up from scratch. I'm using some peanut oil here. I didn't have any avocado oil on hand, like I mentioned, and olive oil just really doesn't go well with mayo. It has too strong of a flavor. You really want to use a neutral oil. And I just throw some apple cider vinegar in there. I put some dill since I'm making this kind of like a pickle chicken salad, and so I wanted those flavors, and a little bit of lemon juice and a little bit of mustard and some salt and pepper. And you just want to take your immersion blender and kind of start at the bottom and slowly move up until it is fully incorporated. Mayo is one of those things that is just like so easy to make, and once I learned how to make it, I stopped buying it from the store, and I saved so much money. Even with the price of eggs, it is cheaper to make your own mayo than to buy it from the store. I saw it in the store the other day and it was like $7 for an entire canister, and I honestly could not believe it. So I'm just chopping up some pickles. I love these pickle chips from Aldi. They are so crunchy. You get them in the refrigerated section and they just can't be beat, besides making it on your own, of course. And I also chopped up some green onions here. I like the flavor of green onions a little bit better than a raw onion in something like a chicken salad or a noodle salad. Sometimes I find the bite of a real onion just a little bit too much in those types of things. I just poured some of the sauce, not all of it, onto this chicken salad. This is pretty much the entire chicken, less what I made with my salad the day before. I stirred it up and I ate it with the crackers. This was great to take to the library during the week and on the road. I also made a pizza. I didn't show you guys how to make it because I've made it so many times on this channel and I didn't want this video to get too long, but you can definitely check out my other videos to see how I make it. So I am just finishing up the bone broth here that I had made the night before. I'll put it in the slow cooker function for about 16 hours. I've made this like a million times on my channel, so I'll link some videos below that kind of go into more details on how I make it. I put the broth into the pot and it was about 4 cups there. And the week before, I had made some bolognese for some lasagna, and so I just froze the extra into a Ziploc bag. I let it thaw then overnight, and I just put it into the soup. And honestly, you guys, like, this is pretty much the soup, and it's like, should I even make a video on it? But honestly, I think that this kind of speaks to how easy some meals can be that are still made from scratch. Like if we prep earlier or you just make double of a batch of something, like to make extra bolognese is really not that much hard. It's just double the ingredients. It's not really double the work like some things can be. And so I just put in a little bit of extra seasoning here, so some garlic powder, some onion powder, and a little bit of red pepper flakes. It was already pretty well seasoned for my bolognese. I let it sit usually for like 8 hours on the stove, so it usually has some pretty good flavor in it already. And I just kind of mix it up, let it sit on the stove for about 15 minutes and kind of get those flavors to marry. But really, this was such an easy weeknight meal to make. I also boiled up some pasta. Now, originally when I made this soup, I boiled the lasagna noodles in the soup. I found that to be a little bit difficult, and I also did not leave the lasagna noodles in the soup. Like, it tasted good, but it was kind of difficult to eat, to be honest. So I just switched up the noodles into a smaller one, like a spiral noodle. But you could really use kind of any noodle that you have on hand here. And honestly, I just plated it up. I put some cheese on top. I put some ricotta in there. And you guys, this was so good and such an easy weeknight meal. I highly recommend giving it a try. So last up on the list are chilaquiles, and I honestly can't believe it's taken me so long to make these because it was so much simpler than I thought, and they were really delicious and just like a fun new weeknight meal. So like I said, I fried up these tortillas earlier on in the week, which is kind of nice because it kind of makes them a little bit more stale once you get to them, which makes them easier to fry a little bit. And I just kept these in the fridge and they stayed up really nice, and I cut them into triangles. I made smaller tortillas. If you make bigger ones, you might want to make them into eighths, but I found that the fourths were just as good. I boiled some guajillo peppers and some tomatillos, and I fried up the corn tortillas in some oil. I needed to do these in about 3 batches, but it only took about 3 to 4 minutes to fry them up, so it really didn't take that long to fry these. And once the water came to a boil, I drained off the water, and then I threw them into my blender and added some bone broth. Here I should have added a little bit more, but I ended up adding some to the pan, so it worked out. But definitely you wanted it more liquidy than you think. I was a little bit nervous to make it too diluted, but Trust me, you can add probably at least a cup, maybe more of liquid. I started to drain off the tortillas, or really the chips at this point, and I put them on a paper plate so that they weren't sitting in oil. I put a little bit of salt on them. I don't really know if you need to. None of the directions said to, but I felt like that was necessary for chips. But I cut up an onion just into slices, and I put them into a pan with just a little bit of oil and the rest of the sauce. And like I said, you can see that I need to add a little bit more liquid here. It's pretty thick, but I added in some more bone broth later on, and I let it kind of sit in some spices. I also added some garlic powder and a little bit of oregano, salt, and pepper. Personally, I think these could have used a little bit of spice as well. The guajillo peppers are not spicy at all. I had never used them before, so I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to make it overly spicy. So I added most of the chips here. I reserved a few so that it would stay crunchy. Because I didn't roll out the tortillas super thin, honestly, the sauce didn't make it very too soft or anything, which I think sometimes with chilaquiles it can be too soft. But that's where I think it was really beneficial to have thicker tortillas here. I added some Oaxaca cheese on top, and I put on the lid to let it get all melty, and as you can see when I take it out later, it is super ooey gooey. I fried some eggs in the oil that was remaining, and honestly this was an interesting way to fry the eggs. I've never done it before, but it was kind of nice because it fried the top without having to flip it over. And so I added some of the chips that I didn't put into the sauce, and here you can see just how gooey the Oaxaca cheese becomes. And you guys, this was so good. I topped it with eggs. I put a little bit of cilantro on it, and 10 out of 10, we would totally make these again in my house. Now, if you loved this video, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a like, and if you want to stick around and you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you loved this video, I really think that you would like my budget video series, and I will link it right above here. You can go ahead and click on it because I have some really great tips and tricks in there, and I think you'll absolutely love it. Thanks so much for sticking around, and I hope to see you guys again soon.